Okay, so next week you guys will have to learn the book called Acts for memory. And that's actually short for the Acts of the Apostles. And it literally just means the things that they did, the stuff they did, the Acts of the Apostles. But if you draw a picture of an axe and write all the apostles' names on it, it becomes the Acts of the Apostles, which is fun. But not at all relevant to what we're talking about tonight. Tonight, we are going, sorry, I got a little on my volume. We are going to begin learning about the theories of creation and evolution. I don't know how, science, that's right. I don't know how familiar you are with evolution, so we are going to have to teach it here. But of course, we're teaching it not as a truth, but rather as a lie that our opponents believe. It's important to know your opponent in a debate if you want to beat them. Addison?
Can I share my sermon summaries in quick?
Yeah, sure, I'll take it. Anybody else have sermon summaries for me?
There's one from September 3rd that I lost and just found.
Okay, that's fine. I don't have a late fee on sermon summaries as long as they get to me. But anyway,
one from 2 years ago.
Today, though, I am going to want to focus on a specific aspect of the creation-evolution debate, and that is on Noah's flood and how that fits into things, because that's an important thing in the Bible that explains a lot about the world that we see today. There's a great deal of evidence for Noah's worldwide flood, and that evidence is completely denied by those who believe in evolution. In fact, the account of Noah's flood is not compatible at all with the theory of evolution. So the fact that we find evidence of it is a powerful thing in our favor. And the reason why we're focusing on Noah's flood is because next Wednesday, this is important, so passing notes, next Wednesday we're going to have a guest speaker. We're going to have Stacy Lung, who is soon to be crowned the Dr. Stacy Lung. She's the executive director of Lutheran Island Camp, and she also has a master's degree in geology and is an expert specifically on, not technically an expert, but she did her master's thesis on the evidence of Noah's flood in the geology of northern Wisconsin and Michigan, Michigan's Upper Peninsula.
Cool.
Yeah, so she has a lot to share. I assume it'll be on that subject, but since she's a geology expert, I thought we should probably get into some flood stuff too. That'll be later on in the class, but we are on page 57 in your workbook.
Whoa.
And the question that we're jumping ahead. So you guys and I are stoked most about the science unit in this book. And so I thought we would start with the science unit, and then we'll go back and do the stuff about Jesus and the Bible, because those are important. But the creation account is really important. A lot of Christians overlook how important the creation account is, because it's just at the very beginning. There's only really 3 chapters in Genesis, and maybe 8 more chapters if you want to kick out Noah's flood and the Tower of Babel also, which are important things for explaining history. But the reason why we can't just throw out the bathwater is because we end up throwing out the baby with the bathwater, because the creation account lays the foundation for everything else that we believe, So Christianity is the belief that Jesus died to save us from our sins and rose again to conquer death. But why did Jesus have to die? Well, it's because we sin. Well, why do we sin? The biblical answer is because God made the world perfect and Adam and Eve screwed it up, right? I had you guys read the Genesis accounts for homework, so I'm hoping that is a little more familiar in your minds. But if you throw out the creation account, you throw out the fall into sin. And if you replace it with the evolution account, as we're going to see, the theory of evolution demands that a lot of things die in order for survival of the fittest to take place, right? The phrase survival of the fittest means that the unfit die. That's obviously the implication there. But if God created a world that already had death in it, and the wages of sin is death, then God created a world that already had sin in it. And if God already made sin and death, then we are not responsible for sin and death, which means, Addison, Zoe, you want to pay attention? Which means that we are not responsible for sin and death. We don't need a savior then. God screwed things up, and God has to fix it. It undermines all of Christian theology. So the creation evolution debate is very important for us as Christians. It is not something that we can just compromise on or be like, yeah, well, maybe, that part of the Bible is just symbolic or something. We don't have that option. Everything falls apart if you don't have the foundation of the fact that God made the world perfect, and our sin is what makes it imperfect. So let's go through the lesson here, and I will add some emphases where we need to. We're on page 57. Is the creation account true? Knowing the truth. As we try to understand the creation of the world, we first need to understand the existence of God. God reveals himself through his creation and through his word. Take a brief look at 3 of the arguments for the existence of God and think of examples that uphold each philosophy. So the first one is cosmology, which is the study of the world's workings. Everything has a cause. So this is commonly known as the cosmological proof of God. That's not cause, it's not about causes. Cosmology is the study of the world. That's what cosmos means, like everything. So the idea is that you look at the world and you see it. Here's you exist. Well, why do you exist? Well, you are the product of your parents who made you exist. And you say, okay, sure, but where did they come from? And of course, they came from their parents, and they came from their parents, and on back. And whether you believe in creation or evolution, you have to admit that everything has a cause until you work your way back through time, however long time is, to the ultimate cause, the place where the buck stops, the one thing that is uncaused. It has just always existed. And if you study physics, you know that it has to be this way. There are some philosophers who say, well, there could just be an infinite series going back forever. But anybody who studies physics knows that there's this thing called entropy that only ever increases as time goes on. And going back in time, entropy can only decrease so far before it hits 0. And that, you can't go any earlier than that. So that's one way to describe entropy anyway. And that's a little beyond what we're talking about. The point is that everything has a cause until you get to the ultimate cause. And the ultimate cause, which itself has no cause, it has just always been, is God. I'll put the equal sign over here, equals God. There we go. That's the cosmological proof of God. It's in that first little speech balloon there on page 57, cosmology. And then we have teleology, the teleological proof of God. I'm not the biggest fan of this one, but it's not a bad proof, and you can see it there in the middle of page 57. The study of design and purpose. Every design has a designer. So, it's a good proof. I don't know why it's not my favorite. I don't have a good reason for that. But basically, you can't just, throw a bunch of sticks on the ground and make a person out of them. You gotta get just the right number of sticks, I guess. These ones are kind of curved, so maybe you could make a head. You can't just throw sticks on the ground and make a person. The fact of the matter is that people are designed. We have all kinds of things that work together to make your body what it is. And if any one of those things is broken, the whole system falls apart. So it's not like they could have just, been thrown together and make it work. There is obvious design, not just in your body, but in the whole universe. Consider this, 1 + 1 = 2. Is there ever a time when 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2? No, 1 + 1 always equals 2. And, all of those other mathematical laws. Well, why? Who said that 1 + 1 should always equal 2? Why is math constant? Why does reality follow rules? Who designs reality that follows rules? And the answer is God did. God is the one who decided that there are some things that just are. And it's hard to wrap your brain around a possible universe where 1 + 1 doesn't always equal 2. But that just goes to show how entrenched we are in this designed world. And the presence of that design implies a designer. So that would be the teleological proof. Telos means end or goal. So teleology would be the study of the end or the goal of the universe. So the fact that there is a design means that at some point a designer had a goal of making that design, and then he made it. And then finally, moral order. I know why I like cosmology and moral order more, because those are in the Bible. Those are in, well, teleology is too. I don't know why I like them. Cosmology and moral order are both present in Romans chapter 1. So if you ever want to see how the Bible itself proves the existence of God, Romans chapter 1 does it. Teleology, the Psalms talk about how the heavens declare the glory of God and the skies proclaim the work of his hands. I'm pretty sure I either gave that to you as memory or I plan to give it to you as memory. But it's in one of the Psalms, I forget which one. But the idea is if you study the heavens, you will see the work of God, and you will learn about God by studying nature, because design is present everywhere. Moral order, every law has a lawgiver. So the idea with moral order, it's kind of hard to illustrate, but everybody knows that it's wrong to murder. You might justify murder by changing the definitions. Like if you think that a certain race or class of people are not really human, then you can justify killing them. But by doing that, you have convinced yourself that it's not murder, because you know that murder is wrong. So you have to convince yourself that it's not murder. You're wrong in convincing yourself that it is murder. Sorry, I messed it up. You're wrong in convincing yourself that certain races are inferior, and thus, when you kill them, it is murder that you're committing, but in your mind, you justify it by saying they're not really human. So there are some people who do that, but even in the midst of that bad justification is the reality that murder is wrong. Everybody knows this. And it's not just murder. Stealing. Sneaking around stealing. You know you have to sneak around if you're going to take something that isn't yours, because you know that you shouldn't be doing it. It's wrong. People have this innate sense of morality, and you have to wonder, where does it come from? Because a lot of the things that we find moral are actually not following Darwinistic rules. And I realize now I haven't explained what Darwinistic rules are, so you wouldn't know that. Darwinistic rules is survival of the fittest, right? So suppose your sense of right and wrong tells you to do something that makes you die, you know? I mean, the whole idea of courage in the face of danger. You want to save somebody who is weak or old or otherwise unfit to reproduce at the expense of your own life. That is a detriment to the species. That sort of instinct cannot have evolved through survival of the fittest. It only exists because there is a greater lawgiver that recognizes that as good, even though it does not benefit the species' survival, or however you want to word it Darwinistically. And so that idea that we have the law written on our hearts then demands the question, well, who wrote it? You know, who wrote the law? And the answer, of course, is God. So we can learn something about God in the absence of the Bible. If you are debating with somebody about the nature of God and they don't believe the Bible, these are things that you can still say are true about God. God is the ultimate cause of everything. God is a designer. So God, an ultimate cause could be the Big Bang. Even the atheists will say, well, sure, the Big Bang is the ultimate cause, or whatever. But they have a harder time dealing with the design argument, and especially the moral argument. So those are things you can keep in your back pocket that help to prove God apart from his self-revelation in his word. That said, you can't learn much about God without consulting his word. God reveals bits and pieces of himself in the world, but if you really want to know God, you have to study the Bible. And in a different unit, we're going to look at why the Bible is a reliable book. There's a lot of evidence that strongly suggests that there is something very special about the Bible that sets it apart from other books. But nonetheless, that's what we can know about God outside of the Bible. We have read we've read the Genesis account of creation. I'm on page 58 now. I haven't turned the page on here. We're not going to do a whole lot on this page. I'm actually going to spend this page talking about evolution, the theory of evolution. You guys have read the biblical account of creation. We know how God made the world because God revealed how He made the world in His Word, and there is a large movement, especially in colleges and universities and academic environments like that. There's a large movement against the account of creation in the Bible in favor of the theory of evolution. So we need to take some time to define evolution. So let's start with that. First of all, it's useful to know the difference between real evolution and fake evolution, because we do not deny all evolution. So I'm going to say, for the sake of clarity, I'm going to write down the basic definition of evolution. Evolution is the tendency of populations to change over time. A classic example. Oh, Addison, question?
Yeah. So if like the Big Bang theory and like that kind of stuff is like a theory, like in like other people's minds, like that don't believe in God, isn't like the biblical way of like how the earth came, isn't that like a theory to them?
They would call that more like a story. A theory is a story. So yeah, we are kind of mixing up words here. A theory is a story that tries to take into account scientific evidence, or that tries to explain the scientific evidence that we have. That's a good definition of a theory. So you have all this evidence, and you think to yourself, how did it get here? And then you think, oh, well, what if this is, what if this story explains how this is like this? To use a less controversial theory, we have the theory of atoms, that they're made of protons and neutrons and electrons, and that theory has been developed over centuries as people have made observations about the physical universe. And the way it generally works is you make an observation, you come up with a theory, and then you try to find a way to test that theory. So originally, people thought that atoms could not be split. All right, the word atom literally means uncuttable. It's Greek. So the original thought of atoms was that they could not be split. And so then scientists thought of, well, if you could split an atom, how would that work? And they eventually found a way to, I think it was basically just a very high-powered explosion against very radioactive material that caused it to split and release a whole bunch of energy and stuff like that. Einstein developed the math behind it, and then scientists proved it experimentally decades later. Einstein, there's a reason why he's famous. He made a lot of predictions that could not be proven for a long time, but they all came true, so most of them anyway.
That's why he's so smart.
That's why he's revered as being so smart, yeah. The father of the nuclear age and all that. And there were other, they don't teach you much history in science class, so I don't really know much about the development of atomic theory. But the whole idea that electrons are outside of the atomic nucleus and this and that, these are all things that somebody was like, well, that's weird. And they see something and they think that's weird. That doesn't fit with the story, with the theory that we know. I wonder if we could come up with a different theory that explains it better. And then they come up with a new theory, and then they try to test that theory with more experiments. So all of that said, the people who came up with the Big Bang Theory did it with the intention of explaining the evidence that we have. But the Bible was not written with that intention. The Bible was written simply to tell what actually happened. And as a result, it helps explain the world that we have. But that's not really the purpose of the Bible, to be a theory. The purpose of the Bible is to tell history. And it just happens to be very relevant in this particular discussion. I don't know if that makes sense, but they are loath. They really don't want to give any scientific credibility to the creation account. So they would really not want to call it a theory because that would make it sound like it's on even footing with the Big Bang Theory. And once they do that, then that's a concession that they don't have to make. They would rather just say that the Bible is a bunch of religious nut jobs from thousands of years ago, and we are enlightened scientists, and things like that. So good question. I'm afraid that's the best answer I can give you on the spot. Back to evolution. Evolution is the tendency of populations to change over time. And a classic example would be, we're not ready for this one yet. Classic example would be, say you have a population of wolves. Yeah, you know what, we can use this one. Okay, say you got some wolves, right? And I meant to make these one-celled organisms, so I guess just pretend these are pairs or something. But you've got the generations going down the line. You know what, forget it, let's make them one-celled organisms. We got a bunch of amoebas up here. We have one amoeba that is able to replicate. It's able to split and form into two amoebas, or maybe more. Some of them die, and that's marked with an X, like this. And as we go on here, they keep on reproducing and stuff, and then there's a mutation. This one is able to take sugar from the environment and turn it into energy. The other amoebas, they had to rely on sunlight, but now this one can take sugar, and they just so happen to live in a very sugary puddle. So all of a sudden now, this one is able to reproduce, and they don't die. They don't die before they reproduce. They all are able to thrive in the sugar puddle, whereas the other ones here are still periodically dying off. In fact, they start dying even more because there's a competition for space and the sugar puddle, and these guys can eat sunlight or sugar, but these ones can only eat sunlight. So as these guys start to crowd them out, the blue ones start dying off. And at the end here, I didn't finish it off, but what started off as only a blue population has now become almost completely red because this one mutation happened that suddenly made the red ones able to survive better. This is the driving idea behind Darwin's theory of evolution, or evolutionary origins. That's what I need to call this. Evolutionary origins. This is why I didn't want to use this one just yet. So we do recognize that this kind of stuff can happen, that something can change inside of a population, and that changes the overall appearance of the population after a set amount of time. And that's what this is. We see this all the time. The population of dogs, for example, is subject to breeding, which is basically artificial evolution, where we have certain traits in dogs, or shoot cattle or horses or any other animal, chickens, anything where we want a certain trait to be expressed more, and we breed them so that the ones that have that trait keep on going. You know, suppose these are chickens, and we have the super meaty chicken here, and the farmer is like, whoa, this chicken has a lot of meat. Let's breed these ones. You know, we'll kill these ones and eat them, but we'll keep breeding these so that we get more and more of them, and then we can start killing them off once we have a whole, once the entire population is the super meaty chickens, then we'll do that. That's the same concept, that's breeding. We have no trouble with that. The trouble that we have is with the idea that this explains the origin of all life. Evolutionists have what's called I gotta write more stuff down here. To keep our vocabulary straight, I'm going to call this one evolutionary origins. I should have used a different color because this is the bad one. I'll throw it in later. Evolutionary origins says that evolution explains where all life came from. Comes from, whatever. Okay? So this is the difference. We are cool with evolution. Evolution happens. It's been observed. It fits with the Bible. The Bible says that stuff dies. The Bible says that the world is cruel and ruthless, and that those who are better fitted to survive are more likely to survive. It doesn't say that outright, but it certainly doesn't deny it, because that is the cruel reality of the world that we live in, is that if you want to survive, you have to outcompete and be the best. Even though that's bad, we are called to go against that tendency and help those who are weak and poor and stuff like that. And that's one of the major countercultural aspects of Christianity. But in order for that to be countercultural, you have to admit that the world that we live in is not like that. It's very, very much survival of the fittest. But we do not affirm evolutionary origins. We don't believe that evolution is able to explain where all life comes from. And that's a very important distinction to make. So for example, suppose you've got, octopuses have ink, right? And when an octopus gets scared, maybe this is my Florida coming out. Yeah, I don't know if this is common knowledge in Minnesota. Yeah, if an octopus gets scared, it shoots out a bunch of ink, and the ink clouds up the water, and the octopus can get away. Now, did God make octopuses, octopi, octivities, whatever you want to call them? Did God make these creatures with that instinct and that ability? Probably not, because when he made them, they didn't need it to survive because they lived in a perfect world where they just survived because that was all anybody could do. There was no death. You simply survived. But they might have had this ink-releasing organ for some other reason that we don't know. And then when the fall into sin comes, the octopuses, maybe some of them realized or perhaps developed an instinct for releasing their ink when they get scared and then swimming away from the thing that scares them. And the ones that have that instinct are the ones who survive because they don't get eaten. The ones that lack that instinct will die off in just a couple generations because the predators eat them. And so this would be maybe the development of that instinct. Really, the only difference in what we believe is that we get rid of these few beginning generations, right? So this is like the original population of octopi right there. So most of them are just kind of doing their thing, but one of them has the instinct to ink and run when it gets scared. And because it has that instinct, it survives a world full of predators. Whereas these guys, they tend to die in a world full of predators. And the ones that survive are the ones that reproduce, and eventually the old form goes extinct, or at least very close to extinct, and the more well-adapted form survives. Another example would be if an ice age happens. Say, for example, you have a bunch of wolves that are dark brown. They blend in very well with the forest. And then the forest changes and it becomes snowy all year long. And some of the brown wolves, they migrate away, but some of them stay and try to stick it out because there's still some prey animals that they can eat living in the snow. Well, one of these brown wolves is born with albinism, which is a mutation that makes them white. They have no pigment. They have white fur, white skin, red eyes, I think. No, I don't know what albinism. Albinism makes blue eyes in people, but I don't know what it does in wolves. Anyway, suddenly you have this white wolf that blends in with the snow. So the other wolves, they can barely get enough food to survive because the food sees them from like 100 yards off and runs away. But the white wolves, they blend in with the snow and they get right up there and brr. So the white wolves are fat and happy, they reproduce, and now we have more white wolves because the genetic trait gets passed down to their offspring. And so they're also the white wolves become the red population. It's something that happened due to a change in the environment that suddenly made them better suited. Were there albino wolves before the Ice Age? Sure, but they died very quickly because they didn't blend in with the forest. But when the environment changes, the population has to adapt or die. So that is how evolution works. And we affirm that. So evolutionists often have what they call a tree of life. I'll make it green because it's life. Oh, there goes my book. And the tree of life looks something like this. In the beginning, by some unknown mean, there was a single-celled organism that came to life. And they don't know how that happened. They freely admit that they don't know how it happened. But it did happen. So there it is. And this thing, over time, and when I say over time, I don't mean this one organism got really complex. I mean, like his great grandbaby happened to have one of these random mutations that made him more complex, and eventually they kind of formed a multi-celled organism that's able to swim in water, right? And so there's all of these fish that evolved from that one population. But then it also, continued to make other one-celled organisms that are like your bacteria and stuff. And one of these fish happened to have the ability to absorb oxygen from the air. And so being overcrowded in the ocean, this fish was able to survive in an area with no water because it could breathe air. And so that particular fish evolved maybe into an amphibian. I don't know, can we do a frog here? That is not a very good frog, that's like a pig. These are their eyes there, see, he's got a great big mouth. That's a frog, yeah, you see it now. And so, yeah, one of these fish evolved into some primitive amphibian, but not a modern frog. It was just some other creature that went extinct a long time ago. But it served its purpose, it was able to survive and carry on, and so we have all these amphibians. And then one of them, became like a reptile over here. Let's see, can I draw a good lizard? That's supposed to be like a lizard, and there we go, or a snake would have been easier to draw. And you got reptiles, and then you've got your birds over here, and that's a rubber ducky. And one of the amphibians might be the ancestor to modern mammals. So here's a mouse with a long tail. And each one of these, over many generations, we're talking billions of years, evolved into their modern forms. And I'm just drawing lines here to simplify the drawing, even though it looks horribly complex. And this all is meant to explain what we see today, the very, very diverse population of living creatures today. This doesn't even include things like plants. I just ejected plants from the situation, but there's plants up in here too. Now, here's the reality. Here's the reality. Today, we observe these. Right? This is today, down here. So this is the modern evidence as we observe all of these different species. All of this stuff is a theory. It's a story that was made to explain how all of these things came to exist today. And that's what people mean when they say evolution is just a theory, not a fact. They mean that it is a story that is able to explain what we see today, but as we observe more things, the story is going to have to change. And a lot of people reject that story outright and say, that's not how it is at all. And the fact of the matter is we Christians actually, we don't like this whole big tree of life thing here, but what we Christians say is, this dotted line here that only goes back a few thousand years in time, this is where life began. God made all creatures on earth somewhere around here. And there has been some evolution. There have been changes in the population. There have been extinction events, namely Noah's flood, that caused a lot of animals to go extinct, even the ones that got off the ark. There was no guarantee they would survive for very long. But we basically affirm this tree of life idea. It's just that we don't go all the way back here. This is crazy talk. We say everything was a little bit different a few thousand years ago, but a world of sin and death has caused things to change in order to be better adapted to survive. Okay, I hope I did a good job explaining the theory of evolution. Does anyone have any questions on that? Have you learned any of this stuff in school yet?
Yeah.
Kind of, yeah, okay. It's not bad to learn evolution. If they make you learn evolution in school, I do not want you to find ways to skip class and fail the unit out of some righteous protest, okay? Just learn it. It is what the majority of people in our country believe, and it is good for you to know it. You don't have to believe it. You can write things, even in this class, I've made you write things that I know you disagree with. And some of you, it's really funny because some of you will still qualify your answers, even though I tell you to answer from the perspective of an atheist. There were some of you who were like, I don't really believe this, but here's what they would say. And it's okay. You can learn the theory of evolution, the theory of evolutionary origins. That doesn't mean you believe it, but it's good to learn it because that's what your culture believes. Page 59, young Earth versus old Earth. Your worldview affects your opinion about the age of the Earth. Those with the creationist worldview mark the Earth's age at approximately 6,000 years. I have a really cool poster on the wall outside the bathrooms. Any of you who've used a bathroom here have seen it. It's a timeline, but it's arranged in a big circle. And that's mostly because it's easier to fit more data on it that way, the way it's designed. And I don't agree with everything on the timeline, but I agree with the overarching premise, which is that the world is only about 6,000 years old. The timeline hammers down the date to 4004 BC as the creation of the world. And I don't know if I'm willing to go that far. There are places like, there was, Exodus says that it was 400 years that the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt. Or does it? It might just be 400 years that the Israelites were living in Egypt. And then is it, exactly 400 years? Like, did somebody have a calendar out? Or is it like 400 and a half years? Because I would still call that 400 years. Or even if it was like 403 years, I'd be like, 400 years, close enough, So I'm not about to say that the world was created on Tuesday, October 17th, 4004 BC or something like that. But I'm also not going to say that the earth is billions of years old, because that is incompatible with the Bible. Whether you want to say it was 6,000 years or 10,000 years, we can have that debate. But the Bible does not allow for a history of the world that is more than a few thousand years. The Bible speaks in Genesis very literally. It uses phrases like morning and evening. It numbers the days. It has all of these indications that this is real history. This is not a poetic account of millions of years that we're just calling days. This is actual, literal 24-hour days, and that's how we should interpret it. And like I said before, reinterpreting the word day to fit with evolutionary origins doesn't solve everything, because it still doesn't deal with the problem of death before sin. Addison?
So were they actually 24-hour days?
In Genesis chapter 1?
Yeah.
Almost certainly, yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, and because there wasn't a sun until day 4, so if God wanted to take more or less time on the first 3 days, I guess that's his prerogative. But he didn't take billions of years. The idea that he might have is really just conceding. I'm using that word a lot. To concede something means to admit that you're wrong. Did somebody knock on our door?
Yeah.
Come in, but not too far. The thing's open. Hello. Oh, is it time? Okay. Don't kick my tripod. To concede something in a debate means to admit that your opponent is right and that you are wrong. That is a concession, or to concede. So I'm going to use that word a lot, so it's good to know it. And people who want to try to say that maybe God used millions of years in those creation days are not reading that in the text itself. There's no evidence in the Bible that it means anything other than a 24-hour day. So they're really only trying to make the Bible fit what they believe is the scientific evidence. And the reality that we're going to be learning is that the scientific evidence doesn't actually point to that reality. Doesn't point to an old universe. It's just a very convenient story that removes God from the equation, and so a lot of people want it to be true. So I guess I just answered that first question there on page 59. The book asks, why is there such a huge difference between the suggested ages of the earth? I guess maybe, who can tell me? Just spit it back to me so I know I'm being heard. Why is there such a huge difference between the suggested ages of the earth? Braden?
Because we believe different things.
So we believe that, yeah, so but why? I mean, why does that have to do with the age of the earth?
Oh, because they think it took that long for the earth to develop this fast.
Okay, yeah, so their idea that evolution explains where life comes from, evolution is a slow process. It does not happen very quickly. And the speciation, evolution within a species, within a population, those changes can come about quickly. But we never observe one kind of animal turning into another one. You can breed dogs into more different dogs, but nobody's been able to breed a dog into a cat or something like that. They're very similar animals, biologically, but it's impossible. It takes too long. At least, it's impossible is correct. But what an evolutionist would say is that it just takes too long. We don't observe these things happening because they happen over millions of years. And so the millions of years timeline is essential to the theory of evolution. I'm going to write that down here. Millions of years. And I'm also going to write down survival of the fittest because that's a really important principle. Survival of the fittest. Whereas the Bible account, as I've already mentioned, we have the creation of Adam on day 6. And if these are literal 24-hour days, which they are, then Adam is basically in the very beginning of the first year of creation. And so everything after Adam is all of human history. And the book of Genesis especially is extremely precise. It says how old every man was when he had his next child in the line. So it's like, Adam was, 130 years old when he had Seth. And then Seth was 140 years old when he had this kid. And they lived for a very long time before the flood. And we'll talk about why that is too some other time. But the point is that if you read Genesis, I think it's Genesis 5, there's this genealogy that gives a very precise length of time from Adam all the way to Noah. And then there are other genealogies that give another precise length of time from Noah to Abraham, and then from Abraham you have it down to the day practically. So there's really not a lot of wiggle room for the age of the earth to be much more than 6,000 years biblically. Evolutionists date the earth using radiocarbon dating. They say, hey Earth, you want to go out to supper? Here's some radiocarbon. Get it? Date? Tough crowd tonight. Evolutionists date the Earth using radiocarbon dating. What are the potential problems with this method of dating rocks? We're going to tackle that one tonight?
Dating rocks?
Yeah, well, we're running low on time, so I want to see what we're going to talk about. All right, we're going to skip that one. I'm gonna highlight it. So I'm just going to remember that we haven't talked about radiocarbon dating. It's a very important discussion to have, but we're down half the class, and we've only got 10 minutes left, and you guys are yawning at me. So we're not going to do radiocarbon dating tonight, but I promise
It
you,
sounds
it's
interesting.
it is. It is a very good discussion. It reveals a lot.
It's recording. You can see it.
Yeah, we'll just save it. Okay, we'll go to the next question here. Thought exercises. What do you think the earth looked like when God created it? And how would this affect mankind's modern day attempts to determine the age of the earth? So what do you think the earth looked like?
I think it looked all together.
All together. So on day 3 of creation, God creates plants, which means he planted a bunch of seeds in the ground, right? So when Adam was created on day 6, he lived in a world with a whole bunch of really tiny sprouts coming out of the ground. Does that sound right?
No. Yeah.
Yeah? Well, where did he get his food then?
No.
Yeah.
No, yeah. When God created the world, he didn't create a bunch of babies. He made a mature creation. Likewise, Adam was not a baby. Adam was a man. He rose up from the ground after God made him, and he got to work naming the animals and taking care of the garden and stuff. When God made the world, he made a mature world. So how would that affect our modern day attempts to determine the age of the earth?
It would make it really hard because all the stuff is all grown up. And it could take years for the stuff to be grown up.
Yeah, I think you've got the right idea. So I'm using plants as an example, but as Stacy Lung will tell us next week, you can do similar things with rocks, okay? So dating a tree, you probably know about this. If you cut down a tree and reveal its stump, if you look really hard at the stump, you find rings, right? And if you count, what's that? Yeah, because when the tree started, it was really skinny, and every year it grew a little bit more, or every winter, or however the rings appeared. You can count the rings to try to determine the age of the tree, right? But what if this tree was already made in a mature state? It might have 30 rings, but it was actually made yesterday. You get what I'm saying? So now imagine the world. We try to date the rocks in the world according to what they're made of, but we have to assume that those rocks were at for lack of a better word, a baby state at the beginning. But what if they weren't? What if God made them mature rocks? Then we would think that the rocks were much older than they really are. Because the reality is this magical tree was made yesterday, but by counting the rings, it looks 30 years old. So also, the world as a whole was made 6,000 years ago. But perhaps if you study the rocks, you might wrongly conclude that it was made 6 billion years ago. And that alone is just one reason why radiocarbon dating can't be trusted. But that's a kind of a thought exercise for you. Question 122 in your catechism. If you have a catechism, bust it out. If you don't, you can listen to me read it. It's on page 138. The question is, where should we begin when considering other competing accounts as to how the world came into existence? So the Bible teaches God created about 6,000 years ago. Evolutionary origins teaches that, the world was made, 14 billion years ago. How do we consider those different accounts? Well, we should evaluate the assumptions they use, determine the reason for those assumptions, and consider whether they lead to unbiblical conclusions. There's a whole article here. Many ancient and modern views assume that the universe always existed, and thus all gods and beings arise from the universe and exist on a spectrum of deity. So you have humans that aren't divine at all, and you have your demigods like Hercules, who are mortal but still godlike, and then you have your lesser gods and your kingly gods and stuff like that. This leads one to assume that everything is in some way divine or part of divinity, thus confusing the creator and his creation. For example, folk religions, pantheism, and polytheism. Next paragraph is where it gets good. Atheistic evolutionary theories assume that the Bible is not the Word of God, and the universe is closed with no possibility of outside intervention. Although nowadays, even evolutionists recognize that that's kind of ridiculous, so they've invented an idea of the multiverse, right? Maybe the universe isn't closed, but there's a whole bunch of universes. But still they would say the multiverse is closed, or whatever, anything to exclude God. This invites the conclusion that the world and universe have no special meaning or purpose. This approach also suggests that there is no absolute truth, and that all human relationships, such as marriage, are simply arrangements of convenience that can be changed as cultures or individuals desire. So a big problem with evolutionary origins is that there's no purpose. That's worth writing down. No purpose. Period. There's no purpose to anything, except maybe to survive. If you study a creature and you find a structure on that creature, you would want to find out why that structure helps it to survive. And most of the time it does, because any creatures that aren't fitted to survive have 6,000 years to die and go extinct. But beyond survival, there really is no purpose to anything ever in atheistic worldview. But then there are people who try to compromise. They call themselves theistic evolutionists. Have you heard that word before? It's on page 139 in your catechism, the third big paragraph. Some theistic evolutionists and evolutionary creationists may hold to a view of Scripture as God's Word, but wrongly assume that in light of current scientific claims, Genesis 1 through 3 should not be read as a historical account of creation. And thus they will affirm that God is the creator, but see evolution as the means by which God made the world as we know it. This undermines and denies other truths in Scripture that depend on the special creation of God. So that's a really complicated way of saying what I've been saying this whole time, which is that if you try to cut off the creation account of the Bible, Braden, turn around. If you try to cut off the creation account of the Bible, you do more than just cut a couple chapters off. You completely destroy the foundation upon which all of the rest of the doctrine of the Bible is built. So you can't just do that. That's what theistic evolutionists try to do, but that is the product of not thinking about stuff. Okay, I had you do most of page 60 basically as homework, where I made you, actually I didn't have you do the difference in creation accounts, but that's not really that important. I had you familiarize yourself with the Bible account of creation, and I hope today I've given you an honest representation of the differences between the biblical account of creation and the theory of evolutionary origins, which we reject. But we don't reject evolution. This is a real thing that happens. It just doesn't explain where everything came from. Next time, we're going to have a guest speaker, Stacy Lung, and she is going to talk to you, I'm almost certain, about flood geology. That is evidence that Noah's flood is a real event that happened in the history of the world. To help you with that, for tonight's homework, I have given you an article. It's published by an organization called Answers in Genesis. It's the article is stapled to the assignment, which is this typical one-page format. It's a short article. It's only 3 pages, and it highlights a single piece of evidence. There's a lot of evidence, but we don't have that much time. I'm not going to make you read an encyclopedia. It highlights a single piece of evidence that favors Noah's flood and counters the idea that the earth is billions of years old. So read through the article and answer the questions. For the sake of clarity, allow me to remind you that an evolutionist is somebody who believes in evolutionary origins. Evolutionist. Okay? Whether they're a scientist or a regular guy or whatever, if they believe that evolution explains where all life came from, they are an evolutionist. I don't have creation anywhere on the board, but the opposite of an evolutionist, the good guys in this case, is a creationist. A creationist is somebody who believes in the biblical accounts of creation as I'm teaching it in this class. So I use that vocabulary a bit in your homework assignment, so just keep that in mind. Otherwise, let's head on out and we'll say a closing prayer together with the group. Thank you for coming tonight.
Yeah.